want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Welcome back to another edition of The Best Movie You Never Saw, and this week we're taking a look at Arachnophobia, Frank Marshall's 1990 comedy horror film about deadly spiders starring Jeff Daniels and John Goodman. And true story, there's a scene in this movie where a spider crawls into a toilet, and since seeing this movie at 8 years old, every time I've used the toilet in the last 30 years, I've checked for spiders.
There's no spider here.
True story. Now, this was released by Walt Disney's now defunct Hollywood Pictures, and in fact, it was the first movie to come out under that banner. Arachnophobia was the feature directorial debut of Frank Marshall, who's Steven Spielberg's longtime producing partner on films such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Color Purple, and Empire of the Sun. While Marshall would go on to direct the acclaimed survival film Alive and the much maligned but still kind of fun Michael Crichton adaptation Congo, Arachnophobia is certainly him at his most Spielbergian. Shot on location in Venezuela and mostly California, Arachnophobia grossed only about $53 million against the $22 million budget. While not even close to the receipts expected from a Spielberg film, Arachnophobia actually didn't do too badly financially and was well received by critics at the time.
Did the right thing for the kids.
For us, it remains one of the most memorable movies from the same summer that saw Total Recall, Dick Tracy, Days of Thunder, and Back to the Future Part 3 hit screens within weeks of each other.
Nobody calls me yellow.
Oh, and lest we forget, it was also the summer of a classic film called Navy SEALs.
You always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
Ooh, Navy SEALs!
Calling it an homage to films like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds and countless B movies concerning swarms of giant bugs attacking unsuspecting suburbanites. This was kind of a thing back then. In the 1970s, they did The Swarm with Michael Caine, where killer bees tried to destroy humanity. It's a real movie, and, good for a drunken watch.
Bees! Millions of bees!
Bees!
Now, they also focused on the fact that this movie would be funnier rather than scary. And there certainly are a lot of funny moments in Arachnophobia.
Yeah, that's right. I'm bad.
But it's definitely not for the squeamish, with many of the bigger sequences still holding up pretty well 30 years later. And I have to say, as a kid, once again, this movie scared the hell out of me. The disconnect was an issue from the earliest days of the film's marketing campaign. As the first movie from Hollywood Pictures, executives struggled with whether to sell it to the audience as a thriller or a comedy. Unable to decide, the ads for Arachnophobia split the difference and call it a thrilomedy.
Arachnophobia, a thrilomedy.
This term didn't really take off. The combination of genres is also what initially brought Marshall on board the project. While on the set of Spielberg's Always, producer Jeffrey Katzenberg brought the script and thought it would make a nice directorial debut for Marshall. Marshall said that he liked the setup and that it reminded him of The Birds, in that The Birds wasn't actually really about the birds, but instead it was about a couple that have a romantic weekend outside of San Francisco and all these weird, scary things start happening to them, and that's what he said appealed to him. The script by Don Jacoby was expanded by Wesley Strick, writer of Martin Scorsese's awesome remake of Cape Fear. Strick was able to balance the scary scenes with snappy dialogue while focusing on the characters, a key element to making this movie work for Marshall.
Can you blame me for being a spider phobe?
Arachnophobe.
Whatever.
He then had to get the right actors, which was easier than expected. Jeff Daniels was cast early on, and Marshall recalled the actor was game for the antics needed for such production. He also revealed that he was already kind of scared of spiders to begin with, so there wouldn't be all that much acting involved. Urban legends have abounded since the film's production that poisonous spiders escaped during filming and still roam the Disney backlot. Marshall adamantly refutes those stories because they only use non-poisonous arachnids. New Zealand native Avondale spider was primarily seen on screen and is not at all poisonous, but looks really scary. Prep work with entomologist Steve Kuchar involved what Marshall called the Spider Olympics. They tested the acumen of various species before settling on the Avondale. For scenes that required more elaborate antics from the creatures, special effects were used. Arachnophobia is notable as one of the first films future Mythbusters host Jamie Hyneman will work on. While hundreds of live spiders were used, articulated models were often used, along with simple magnets to enhance many sequences. Now, working with animal actors is always a challenge, but spiders, well, that's another story entirely. Marshall said that they would often go with the flow during production, but one scene in particular caught everyone off guard. In one sequence involving spiders bursting through a sink drain, technicians blew hot air up the drain to prompt the spiders. They then exploded out en masse to Marshall's delight, making for a memorable sequence that, again, scared the hell out of me as a child. Marshall also recalls the most challenging shot as being the spider in the popcorn scene, which needed a lot of takes, and again, scared the hell out of me as a child. The final shot in the film was ad-libbed by a spider, and again, scared the hell out of me as a child. What is especially memorable about Arachnophobia, aside from the spiders, is the inclusion of John Goodman.
Rock and roll.
At the time, Goodman was best known for ABC's Roseanne and broader comedic roles like Raising Arizona. Marshall had just worked with Goodman on Spielberg's Always and thought he'd be the perfect Delbert McClintock.
Would anybody object if I tore this floor out?
I would.
False alarm, then lead on.
The cool as cool exterminator. In fact, they shot his entire role during the 1 week each month he was not filming Roseanne. Arachnophobia, however, is also full of other recognizable character actors. You know the faces, but their names likely escape you. This is also likely why the movie poster features the memorable Norman Rockwellian image of a spider backlit by a moon, rather than by the faces or of the cast or even names of the actor. One of the weird things about this movie is that when it came out on VHS and DVD, they used the same image, but they got rid of the spider. I mean, what gives? This has only actually been fixed on the Blu-ray release. Once you start watching the movie, you'll recognize the faces of all the interesting character actors in it, including Harley Jane Kozak, who plays Jeff Daniels' wife. To Marshall's credit, Arachnophobia never veers too far into camp. 2 decades after it debuted in theaters, the film still works pretty well. Some elements of it, of course, feel dated, but the special effects hold up pretty well. Like the best Steven Spielberg movies, Arachnophobia feels timeless. The suburban setting is quaint, which makes the deaths of each resident all the more crazy to endure. From Dr. Methgaff's slow, agonizing death at the beginning to the aforementioned popcorn scene, each sequence is relatable for the majority of the audience. While I've never lived in a town quite as small as they depict in the movie, the staples of movie theaters, high schools, football games, doctors' offices, and more are common to North America. I know that after seeing this movie, I never blindly put my hand into popcorn or used a bathroom ever again. Arachnophobia also owes a great debt not only to Spielberg's directorial work, but also to movies like Poltergeist and Gremlins, Amblin films of the 80s and 90s. While the movie opens in Venezuela with the introduction of the spiders before shifting to California, it bears elements of the Indiana Jones films. When the spiders start cropping up through town, the Gremlins connections abound as these small furry monsters begin wreaking havoc. The introduction of Julian Sands as the expert Dr. James Atherton suddenly makes you feel like everything would be alright. Or it would have been if I hadn't seen the movie Warlock a year before this film came out and also been horribly terrified of Julian Sands from beginning to end.
You're the first to have laid eyes upon the new Messiah.
Of course, he turns out to not be such a bad guy, but yeah, things don't go so well for him. And we feel it alongside Jeff Daniels as Dr. Ross Jennings. His own arachnophobia, a crippling plot device through the entire movie, comes to a head in the climatic Battle of the Cellar sequence.
Oh, shit! I'm in the goddamn nest!
His own home, transformed from idyllic and beautiful to cavernous House of Horrors, becomes the setting for one of the most intense sequences in the entire film. And Jeff Daniels has a really nice everyman quality, which makes you root for him. 30 years after it debuted in theaters, Arachnophobia remains a wonderfully dark adventure thriller that is the perfect introduction to horror movies for younger viewers, and indeed is streaming on Disney Plus in certain territories. It is as scary as it is hilarious, and deserves to be ranked alongside Gremlins and Ghostbusters as one of the best ever thrillamedy movies ever made. Check it out!
Thank God.
Don't mention it.
And if you like this kind of material, make sure to click on the bell to receive notifications for all of JoBlo Video's latest uploads. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.
I will hunt down the alleged arachnid and spread some of the kingdom come.